Get off my pier, a Navy SEAL shoved a nurse into the ocean. She was the three-star Admiral. The man who pushed her was still laughing when she surfaced. The water hit her like a wall, cold, dark salt in her throat before she even had time to close her mouth. She came up fast, one hand already reaching for the pier, and the first thing she saw was his face. Tan, proud, the kind of face that had never once questioned whether it belonged somewhere. He was looking down at her the way a person looks at something that fell off a table, mildly inconvenient, already forgot. Behind him, 3 other men in tactical gear were laughing. One of them was doubled over, and the woman in the water, the one with gray at her temples and seawater in her ears, she just looked up at him. She did not yell. She did not reach for anything to identify herself. She just looked at his face and held it in her memory the way a person holds a debt they intend to collect very, very slowly. Her name on the base roster read Commander Margaret Osai, Medical Liaison, Naval Station Coronado. That was the name the receptionist used when she called ahead. That was the name on the visitor badge she had been handed at the gate. She had asked for the badge. She had asked for the civilian vehicle. She had asked her aide to remove the stars from her collar before she got out of the car. She did this sometimes, not often. But sometimes she needed to see a thing as it actually was before it knew she was watching. The pier was restricted. She had known that walking onto it. The sign said authorized personnel only, and she was not wearing anything that authorized her to anyone. She had walked to the end of it anyway because she wanted to see the water from that particular angle, and because in 31 years of service she had earned the right to stand wherever she wanted on any piece of ground the Navy claimed, whether anyone else knew it or not. That was the part that took the longest to learn. Not rank. Not protocol, the quiet certainty that you belong somewhere even when no one is looking at you with recognition. She had been standing at the railing for maybe 4 minutes when she heard the boots on the wood behind her. She did not turn around. She already knew from the cadence that there were 4 of them, that they were moving with the particular loose-limbed confidence of men who had never once been told to move differently, and that at least one of them had noticed her and made a decision about her before he had walked close enough to ask a single question. He said, "Get off my pier." She turned around then. He was maybe 32, big through the shoulders, the kind of sun-worn that comes from real work outside and not from a tanning bed. His vest had his name on it, Kowalczyk. She read it the way she read everything, once, completely done. She said she was just looking at the water. He said she could look at it from the other side of that sign. The man to his left, younger, barely 25, shifted his weight. He had caught something in how she stood, not what she said or how she said it, but something physical. The way her shoulders sat, the way she had turned around without hurry. He started to say something and Kowalczyk was already moving, and then she was in the water and the sound of them laughing followed her down. She swam to the ladder at the side of the pier without rushing. Kowalczyk was already walking back toward the training facility. His 3 men followed. One of them glanced back once. The young one, the one who had started to say something. He watched her climb the ladder. He watched her wring out the sleeve of her jacket. He watched her reach into her jacket pocket and check a device that looked like a phone and put it back. She looked up and their eyes met, and she gave him a very small nod. Not a smile, a nod. The kind that means I see you too. She walked back to the civilian sedan and told her aide to take her to the base commander's office and to call ahead so they would not be waiting in the lobby. The aide said, "Should I say who is coming?" She said, "Use my full title." She was still dripping when she sat down across from Rear Admiral Hennessy. His face went through 5 different stages in about 4 seconds. Shock, confusion, the beginning of a question, the death of that question, and then a very careful stillness. She told him she had a few things she wanted to discuss about readiness culture at this installation. She asked if he had time. He said he had as much time as she needed. The smell in his office was coffee and something industrial, floor wax maybe, the kind that only appears in buildings that take themselves very seriously. And outside through the window she could hear the distant sound of the Pacific moving against the shore, restless and even and completely indifferent to all of it. 3 weeks before she walked onto that pier, Margaret Osai had sat in a Senate subcommittee hearing room on the 4th floor of a building in Washington, D.C., where the air conditioning ran too cold and the overhead lights gave everything a yellowish flatness that made healthy people look like they needed something. She had been sitting in the 3rd row of the observer section, not the witness table, the 3rd row. Because the person at the witness table was a man named Gerald Fallon who was telling 6 senators that the Navy's medical readiness programs were, in his word, sufficient, and she had wanted to hear the word come out of his mouth in that room before she decided what to do next. Sufficient. Gerald Fallon was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and he had held that role for 8 months, and before that he had spent 11 years as a healthcare administrator in the private sector, and he could read a budget spreadsheet faster than almost anyone she had ever met. What he could not do was tell you what happens to a corpsman's hands after 14 hours in a forward surgical unit, or describe the sound a ventilator makes when the generator fails at the exact wrong moment, or explain what it costs a person to carry the specific weight of a decision they made under conditions that no amount of administrative language has ever come close to describing accurately. Sufficient. She had written the word down on the notepad in her lap, one word, nothing else around it, just that one word sitting alone in the center of a white page with her pen lying next to it. The senator from Virginia had asked Fallon about retention numbers, and he had said the numbers were trending in a positive direction. The senator from Arizona had asked about equipment readiness, and he had said there were allocations in place. The senator from Michigan had asked a question about a specific incident at a forward operating base in which 3 Navy medical personnel had been working with equipment that had been flagged for replacement 14 months before the incident occurred, and Fallon had said that matter was under internal review. Margaret had picked up her pen and drawn a single line under the words she had written. Then she had put the pen down and looked at Gerald Fallon and waited for the next question. She had known Fallon for 6 years. Not well, professionally. They had been in the same rooms a number of times over those 6 years, and he had always treated her the way men who are very impressed by themselves treat women who are doing something important quietly. He acknowledged her. He did not see her. There's a difference in most people who do it do not know they are doing it, and Fallon absolutely did not know. That was the thing about Gerald Fallon. He was not cruel. He was not corrupt. He was something harder to fix than either of those things. He was a man who had been told he was the smartest person in the room so many times over so many years that he had stopped being able to tell what a room actually contained. The subcommittee hearing ended at 3:47 in the afternoon, and she was in the hallway when her phone showed a message from her senior aide. The message said there had been an incident aboard a ship in the 3rd Fleet operating area. Details incoming. She read the message and stood still in the hallway for 3 seconds. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and the particular dry cold of recycled government building air. She did not look alarmed. She did not move faster than usual. She turned left toward the exit and called her aide back and said she needed wheels in 7 minutes and a secure line before she landed. The incident was not yet a crisis. That was the important distinction, and also the one most people in her experience were incapable of making. An incident is a signal. A crisis is what happens when you ignore enough signals. She had spent the better part of her career learning to feel the difference in her chest before any data confirmed it, the same way certain people can feel a change in weather before any cloud appears, and right now, standing in a government hallway with damp air on her face from where someone had left a door open, she felt the particular pressure that meant this was not finished. She was right. The ship was the USS Merriweather, a destroyer currently operating 200 miles off the coast. 22 hours earlier, a training exercise had gone wrong in a way that training exercises are specifically designed to prevent going wrong. A junior officer had been injured, not critically. But the ship's medical officer had made 3 sequential decisions that should not have been possible under current protocol, and the reason those decisions had been possible was directly connected to a readiness gap that Margaret had flagged in writing to the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary 8 months ago, before Gerald Fallon arrived. Flagged and documented and filed, and she now understood with absolute certainty, unread. She did not allow herself to feel the anger yet. Anger was a tool, and like all tools, it was only useful if you picked it up at the right moment. She had learned this from a surgeon she had worked under at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center 24 years ago, a woman named Dr. Theodora Vance, who had the kind of stillness in a crisis that seemed almost inhuman, until you understood that it was the most human thing about her. Vance used to say that the moment you let the size of the problem into your body is the moment the problem gets larger than you. Keep it outside, work the steps, let the size of it in after the patient is stable. Margaret had never forgotten that. She had built most of herself around it. Her aide met her at the car and handed her a tablet with the preliminary incident report, and she read it in the back seat on the way to the airfield. Every sentence. No skimming. Her aide, a lieutenant named Carrera who had been with her for 2 years and had learned not to speak during the reading, sat in the front and watched the road and waited. When she finished, she looked up and said, "What is Fallon's schedule tomorrow morning?" Carrera said he has a briefing at 8 and a lunch with the undersecretary at noon. She said, "Clear by 9 o'clock." Carrera said, "Yes, ma'am." She looked back out the window. The road to the airfield ran past a stretch of low scrub, and the sky above it was going orange and gray at the edges the way it does when the light is leaving. And she thought about the word sufficient, and the line she had drawn under it, and the senator from Michigan, and the 14 months, and the equipment, and she let herself feel it for exactly 3 seconds, the weight of all of it. And then she put it somewhere behind her ribs where she kept things she was not finished with yet, and she looked at the road and said, "What is the weather at the flight deck?" Carrera said, "Clear, light chop, 14 knots out of the southwest." She said, "Good." She had done her residency at a military trauma center. 12 hours into her first overnight, she had watched a man die from a preventable complication because the attending who had been responsible had not checked one item on one checklist, and had not checked it because he had been on his feet for 19 hours, and was operating on the particular dangerous confidence of someone who had done the same procedure so many times, he believed he no longer needed to verify anything. She had been 27 years old. She had been the most junior person in that room. She had known something was wrong 6 minutes before it became catastrophic and had not said it out loud because every signal around her told her that the room did not want to hear from her yet. She had never made that mistake again, not once, in 31 years. She had said the thing out loud every time and taken the consequences, and over time the consequences had gotten smaller because she had got harder to argue with, not louder, harder. There is a difference, and it takes most people a long time to understand it, and some people never do. The helicopter reached the Merriweather at 22:13 hours. The deck was moving with the chop, and the smell of salt and aircraft fuel hit her the moment the door opened. She was down the ladder before anyone finished introducing themselves, and she went directly to medical. The ship's medical officer was a lieutenant commander named Park, 36, 7 years in. He was sitting in the medical bay when she walked in, and he stood immediately, and she could see it in his face before he said a word. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated, the specific expression of someone who has done something technically defensible that they know is not actually right. She looked at the injured officer first. Petty Officer 2nd Class Dominique Reyes, 19 years old, right shoulder, stable, sedated. She checked the chart and read the notes and stood there for a moment with the chart in her hands and the sound of the ship moving around her, the particular low hum and shift of a vessel at sea that she had not heard up close in 3 years. Park said, "Admiral, I want to explain the decisions I made during the..." She said, "Not yet." He stopped. She read the rest of the chart, set it down, looked at the equipment locker, opened it, stood there looking at what was inside. The smell in medical was antiseptic, and something underneath it, slightly metallic, the smell of old equipment in an enclosed space, the smell of things that had not been replaced. She closed the locker. She turned around. She said, "Lieutenant Commander Park, you made 3 decisions tonight that the protocol I wrote 4 years ago would have prevented. And the reason you did not have that protocol is that it was removed from implementation guidelines in a budget revision 8 months ago. I am telling you this because I need you to know it was not only your failure. And I am also telling you that 2 of those 3 decisions were yours alone, and we are going to talk about that tomorrow. Tonight I want you to go write down everything you remember from the moment the injury occurred in sequence, everything, every detail, and have it on my desk by 600. Can you do that?" Park said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Go." He went. She stood alone in the medical bay and listened to the ship. The hum, the shift, somewhere down the passageway a door closed. The overhead light was the flat white fluorescent of every military medical space she had ever stood in, and the temperature was kept slightly cold for the equipment, and she stood there in it for a moment, very still, just the ship moving underneath her. Then she sat down at the desk and opened her laptop and started writing. The first email was to her senior staff, timeline and preliminary findings. The second email was to the Office of the Judge Advocate General, brief 3 sentences. The third email took longer. She drafted it twice. It was addressed to Gerald Fallen's office, and it was not aggressive, and it was not accusatory, and it was also the most precise document she had written in several years, which in her experience was more dangerous than either of those things. She cited 7 specific dates. 4 specific documents, 2 specific signatures. The word "sufficient" did not appear in the email. She did not need it to. She sent it at 1:34 hours and closed the laptop and sat in the cold white light for a moment. And then she went to find a bunk because she needed 4 hours, and she had learned a long time ago that the work does not get better when you are not rested, and the patient does not benefit from your suffering, and the only thing that serves anyone is the thing that actually works. She slept deeply and without dreaming, which was something she had trained herself to do the same way she had trained herself to do most things, with patience and repetition, and the understanding that the body is a piece of equipment, and equipment that is not maintained does not perform when it is needed, and she had always intended to be needed. She was up at 5:30, coffee in the officer's mess, dark, which she took without anything in it. The petty officer who poured it for her glanced at her collar and then looked again, and she watched him recalibrate his face, and she said thank you and took the cup and went back to medical. Park's report was on the desk, 14 pages, handwritten. The handwriting was small and even, and she could tell he had not slept, and she could also tell he had written everything down, actually everything, which told her something about him she had not been certain of before. She read all 14 pages with her coffee and the sound of the ship around her and the slightly sweet chemical smell of the coffee mixing with the antiseptic, and when she finished, she put the pages down and sat with them for a moment. He had made 2 errors of his own. The third decision, the one she had identified the night before as the most problematic, had actually been the result of a guidance gap, which meant it was systemic, which meant it went in a different column. She drew a line in her mind the way she had once drawn a line under a word on a notepad in a Senate hearing room, and she moved the third decision to a different place and left the 2 that were his. Reyes was awake when she went to check on him, pale. The pain medication had him slow. He looked at her collar and she watched his expression shift. She said, "How are you feeling?" He said, "Like I got crushed." She said, "You did. How is the shoulder?" He said, "It hurts." She said, "That is correct and accurate, and it means the nerves are working." She looked at his chart and made a note and then looked at him. She said, "You are going to be fine, Petty Officer Reyes. The shoulder will heal. You will get back to full duty, but I need to ask you something about what happened during the exercise." He said, "Okay." She asked her questions. He answered them. He was honest in the way that very young people are sometimes honest when they are in pain and scared, and someone who seems like they already know the answer asks them something directly. She did not write anything down while he talked. She listened and held it. When he was done, she said, "Thank you." She meant it. He said, "Is someone going to be in trouble?" She said, "Some people are going to have some very important conversations." She said, "That is not the same thing," and also yes. He almost smiled. She went back to the desk and added to her preliminary report and sent the updated version to her staff, and then she went to the deck because she wanted to see the water. The ocean at 700 was gray-green and moving with a long, low swell, and the sky was overcast in the way it is over the Pacific in the early morning, not dark, just pale, the color of something that has not decided yet what kind of day it is going to be. She stood at the rail and felt the salt air on her face and the cold of the metal railing under her palms, and listened to the ship moving through the water. Somewhere behind her, 2 sailors were doing something with rope and talking to each other quietly. A gull appeared and disappeared. The air smelled of salt and diesel and something clean underneath it that had no name. She thought about the pier at Coronado. She thought about Kowalczyk's face when he looked down at her from the boards above, and about the young man who had started to say something and then watched her climb the ladder, and about the look on Rear Admiral Hennessy's face when she sat down across from him, still dripping in a building that smelled of floor wax and ambition. Hennessy had said the incident was unauthorized, and she had said yes it was, and he had said Petty Officer Kowalczyk would be disciplined, and she had said she would like to decide what that discipline looked like, and he had said, of course, Admiral. He had said he didn't understand why she had approached the inspection this way, and she had said she was not inspecting, she was observing, and he had said, "Is there a difference?" and she had said, "Always." She had asked him afterward to pull the personnel file on the young man, the one who had started to say something. His name was Specialist Aaron Torres, and he was 23 years old, and his review scores were solid, and his commanding officer had written in his last evaluation that Torres has good instincts but needs confidence in expressing them. She had read that line twice. She had asked Hennessy to flag Torres for the advanced leadership track, and Hennessy had said he would, and she had said not as a suggestion. She did not do this out of sentiment. She did it because the instinct to speak when something is wrong and the specific courage required to actually do it were the rarest combination she had encountered in 31 years of service, and she was not in the habit of letting rare things go unrecognized. On the deck of the Merryweather, with the Pacific moving under her, she thought about Torres and about Park and about Reyes with his pale face and his honest answers, and about all the 23-year-olds in all the positions she could not see from any office, doing things that mattered in ways that would never appear on any spreadsheet that Gerald Fallon had ever reviewed. She thought about the word sufficient. She gripped the rail and felt the cold of it in her palms, and she thought about what it costs to call something sufficient when it is not. Not the political cost, not the bureaucratic cost, the actual cost, the cost that is paid in medical bays on ships at sea at 2200 hours by people who are doing the best they can with what they have been given. That cost, the one that never appears in the budget documents. The one that is paid in pain and error and the particular specific grief of something preventable. The water moved, the ship moved with it, the sky was still deciding. She stood there until she was cold through her jacket, and then she straightened up and let go of the rail and went inside because she had work to do and the ocean would be there when she came back. Gerald Fallon resigned from his position 11 days after she sent the email. She was not in the room when it happened. She was told about it by phone by a member of the deputy secretary's staff who seemed to expect a reaction from her and did not get one. She thanked them for letting her know and ended the call and sat for a moment in her office with the phone in her hand. She did not feel satisfied. She felt the particular flatness that follows the completion of a necessary thing. The work was not finished. It had only just begun in the form it actually needed to take. There were 7 other readiness gaps she had identified and not yet addressed. There were changes to training protocol that required legislative language and would take at least 18 months to implement if she started today. There were 14 people in positions throughout the Naval Medical Command who needed different conversations than they had been having, and 3 of those conversations would be difficult in ways that difficulty rarely is when it comes from outside rather than inside. Reyes was transferred to a rehabilitation facility in San Diego 6 days after the incident. She visited him once. His shoulder was improving faster than the initial projection. He was doing the exercises. She watched him work through a set, and he did them with the focused patience of someone who intends to come back to something, and she thought that was a good sign about more than just the shoulder. Park completed his written report and they had their conversation, and it was as difficult as she had expected and also as necessary. He was a good officer. He was not yet a great one. She told him both things directly and told him the distance between them was not fixed and watched him take it in. Whether he did anything with it was not something she could control. She gave him the thing and it was his to carry. She went back to Coronado 3 months later, official this time, full uniform. The car was not civilian and the badge at the gate was not visitor. She walked the same pier from the other end and stood at the same rail and looked at the same water. Kowalczyk was not present. He had been transferred. It had not been her decision and she had not requested it, and she had also not objected. Torres was present. He was standing with a group of his unit near the training building, and he looked up when she walked past, and she gave him the same nod she had given him from the water 3 months before, the one that meant "I see you," and this time he stood straighter and gave her one back. She put her hands on the cold rail. She looked at the Pacific. The morning was clear for once, the kind of clear that only happens on the California coast a handful of times before the marine layer comes back. The light going gold off the water the way it does when everything is exactly what it appears to be, no filter, no obscuring, just the thing itself open and visible to whoever is paying attention. She thought about the moment she hit the water and the cold and the salt and his face looking down. She thought about climbing the ladder. She thought about what it means to surface. She had not been afraid in that water. That was the thing she had not told anyone. She had been calculating. She had been reading the faces above her and filing information and feeling the cold as a fact and not as a threat. But underneath all of that, in the place where the things she had never said out loud to anyone lived, there had been something else too. Something that had no professional word for it. Something that felt, if she was honest about it, like relief. Like the world had finally confirmed something she already knew, and she could now proceed accordingly. She looked at the water. The light moved on it the way light always moves on water, which is to say it moved the way living things move, without pattern, without plan, just according to what the moment required. She had given 31 years to an institution that had not always known what to do with her, and she had done it because the mission was real and the people were real, and the cost of leaving was a cost she was not willing to make other people pay. That was the want and the need at the same time, and the difference between them was something she understood now that she had not understood when she was 27 years old and standing in a room where someone was dying while she stayed quiet. She was not quiet anymore. She stood at the rail for a long time. The light changed. The water kept moving. Somewhere out there past where the eye could follow, the Pacific went on for a very long distance, blue and deep and cold and full of things that had not been found yet. And she thought that was probably true of most things, that the finding was the work, that the work did not end, that the only question worth asking about it was whether you were the kind of person who kept going after you already knew the answer. She let go of the rail. She walked back down the pier. Behind her, the water did what water does.